everyone. My name is Daphne Thomson, and I help municipalities and local governments implement AI and work through that real change management. Now, one of the things that have been on the topic consistently is AI and legal advice. So I have the utmost pleasure today to speak to Scott Parker Law, and he is here to help us navigate this. I'm going to ask him some questions. But please, Scott, we met at the Algant conference in Northwest Territories, and I absolutely loved what you said. And you spoke with such ease, and you said really just made everything so much understandable that I thought we have to have a recorded conversation. So thank you for being here, and I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Daphne. It was a real pleasure to meet you at the conference in Betchico in November. So my name's Scott Parker. My company is called Scott Parker Law Professional Corporation. I'm a lawyer licensed in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, and I practice out of Yellowknife. I'm currently a contract lawyer with the firm of Lawson Lundell here in beautiful and very cold Yellowknife.
Awesome. So let's just dive right into it. AI is currently the trend everywhere. Yes, we use it. It is embedded in everything that we use. And of course, we are using it for legal advice too. If we want to admit it or not, we are. We are putting stuff in there saying, hey, explain this to me. Or what is my understanding on this? Can I do that? What does this bylaw mean? So help us understand just what AI can then actually do in those instances, and why is it a little bit dangerous?
Well, you're right that AI is absolutely everywhere, whether we are really relying on it or not. It's affecting everything that we're doing with the computer and even things that are happening outside of our computers. So just like with Googling a medical condition, legal issues, people will always Google it, and now people are using AI to ask specific questions like, is this thing illegal? Is there a law against this? And then AI can find them some kind of answer. So it can be very positive for people, just like, if you wake up and you have a rash on your hand and you Google it or you take a picture of it or whatever, it could give you an indication, well, I think it's this or I think it's that. You should still go see a doctor. And with legal matters, it's also useful. Like you hit somebody's car in a parking lot, and so you Google it to find out, gee, am I responsible for this? Can I get in trouble? Can I get arrested? And maybe Google or AI or a combination of a web search and AI, however that works, will give you some kind of an answer. The biggest problem with getting your legal answers from AI, especially an open AI system that learns from the web and it learns from everything, is the consequences related to getting a bad answer can be very high. So you hit somebody in a parking lot, you Google it, well, it's not your fault, you don't have to worry about it. And so you just leave it until somebody shows up at your door and you have a charge against you for leaving the scene of an accident or something. So we have to be very careful, I think, when we're using AI to understand what is the risk that the information, that the answer I'm going to receive is wrong, and what are the consequences of that wrong answer. So for example, a friend of mine does all of her meal planning each week using ChatGPT. And it's amazing. I want this many calories. I want to make 3 dishes for lunch. I want to use chicken and fish, all this sort of stuff. It's amazing. And she can go through and she can adjust it, more protein. I don't like onions, all this sort of thing. I want to be able to make it in 30 minutes. And it all keeps coming out. So that's amazing. But there's very little risk to that. She gets something she doesn't like to eat, and there's very little consequences. Maybe it takes 2 hours to prepare instead of 30 minutes. But when you look at legal issues, you're going to have a fairly high risk of getting a wrong answer an incomplete answer or a misleading answer if you're just using regular ChatGPT or Copilot or Perplexity or any of those sort of publicly available systems. And you can also get the problem with that is if it gives you a wrong or misleading answer and then you take action based on that, your consequences could be very high. You could miss a filing deadline. You could think you're in the clear for something. Somebody sent me a statement of defense. It looks like I'm getting sued. What do I have to do next? Well, what your steps are next are very specific in the courts. You have to respond to that. And if you get a different answer from AI, you might miss the boat and then run into a whole world of problems. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying, well, you better not use AI, always call a lawyer. But if it's a legal problem and it has consequences for you or for somebody else, it's always best to talk to a lawyer and not rely on AI.
Well, I think you hit on a very crucial point. So one thing is, yes, just relying on AI. I mean, AI won't take responsibility if there is something that is wrong. Who's going to be liable is the person that actually implements it. It's not the robot. Who's the human in the situation? That person is going to have the implications and the liability, and they're going to carry the consequences, not AI. But let's take an example for municipalities, for example. There's new legislation that came out. They need to draft their new bylaws. Based on this new legislation, AI dumbs it down for them so they understand what it is, and then give it over to write the bylaw, for example. Now, in situations like that, because that happens every single day, what I'm finding majority of the time is there's no reference point to truly make sure that your understanding is correlated to something. So that when AI has now broken this down into bite-sized bits so that you understand it better, where can you cross-check that that's actually accurate?
That's a big problem, Daphne, especially with legislation. And legislation often comes with attached regulations, which are equally as important. And many people I talk to don't know anything about regulations. They look at the legislation, they'll find that specific section that addresses their problem, or you can create an AI summary that will be like the top 5 most important things of this legislation that you need to know, but it's missing other things because legislation is complicated. That's one of the things that lawyers spend a lot of time learning how to do in law school and through our practice. People come to us with a problem. The problem might be, we want to do this thing. Can we do that? Does the legislation allow us? They might even have an idea. They might say, it appears to me that the legislation may have restrictions on this type of building project or this type of business because they've used a little bit of AI to ask those questions. But when you get into the legislation, there's so many little nuances in the legislation. I mean, you can have a section 52, which AI has said, section 52 is really important to your bylaw. You have to make sure that's in there. But then section 52 says, well, subject to section 3, which means that you don't have to pay any attention to this because you're a charter community or you're not incorporated as a town. So it can be really tricky. There's a lot of ways that you can get tripped up there. What AI can help, especially municipal administrators do, I think, is to summarize legislation in a way that will help the administrator understand, what do I need to do with this legislation, this new legislation? How do I need to update my bylaw? And then have a more literate conversation where required with a lawyer or somebody who has more expertise in reviewing that actual legislation to make sure that none of those little traps that might be in the legislation are ignored to the administrator's peril, like in 2 or 3 years down the road.
I love what you said, because yes, We are not lawyers, administrations, we're not, but because we work on it so often, there's some understanding that there is. However, when there's new legislation come in, for example, let's take AI policies now. Everyone is looking for an example policy, and AI does a really good job taking all the various policies that they are in place and creating comparison, to say, hey, this jurisdiction or this municipality said XYZ, this municipality said XYZ, comparing it and saying, oh, well, there's a gap. And that gives us administrators a form or something to start off with, right? But what are some of the risks that when we put a policy or a bylaw in place, when we've done these comparisons and we drafted it, what are some of the things that we still have to keep in mind to have our human oversight? Like you were saying with the different nuances.
I think that will come down to who has the expertise to give the oversight. So, and that can be very tricky. For example, I can have AI work on a budget, or what do I think my taxes are going to be, or what are the tax implications of this maneuver. I can research it, I can follow the sources, but really I need somebody who's going to have expertise in that, especially with the professions. Like you have people who are specifically trained in accounting or in law. So I would say one of the things that can happen with municipalities, and I've heard this from administrators, like municipal administrators have to be some of the most
Versatile.
time challenged, versatile, knowledgeable people in the world. They're dealing with employment issues. They're dealing with new bylaws. A dog bit somebody. All this sort of thing. A house, well, can we tear that down? Are we going to auction it off? What's happening? Like, it's so complicated. And nobody that I know of has the time to be able to go through a piece of legislation that might be 30, 40, 100 pages and go through and tease out those nuances. But one thing that I think that AI is very useful for is to be able to create those overviews so an administrator can get kind of the condensed version, put a bylaw together, and then my suggestion for oversight in that situation is you either pass it off to somebody who is a more experienced administrator through your network, or you might know somebody, well, they just drafted an AI policy. What did they run into? And get updates from them. Or work with a lawyer who's familiar with drafting policy and can make sure you're up to date with all the recent legislation. So those are really your two options, I think, to either connect with a peer or hire whatever the relevant professional is, because otherwise you're going to be stuck having to do a deeper and deeper dive into the legislation, relying on AI to say, oh, this is what you need to know. This is what you need to know. And it may not always be what you need to know. And we go back to the idea of risks and consequences. So what's the risk that even after multiple deep dives with AI, something's missing, or it's suggesting that, well, everybody else wants to really know about these things, so you also want to really know about these things. But there's some areas in there that may either affect everybody, but it's being ignored, or may affect your jurisdiction or your particular community or your situation very specifically. So in that case, I really think it's worthwhile to have a professional, a lawyer, look through those things so that they can say, yes, you're going to be okay, and you can rely on this policy, because where the consequences come in is that this could be something that doesn't cause you any problems for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then suddenly there's an issue with it. And it's like, well, this bylaw, and we see this bylaw is not in compliance with the regulations. Like this clause you have in your bylaw that you're relying on, and you want us to represent you, this clause can't be in this bylaw. It's prohibited by the legislation or the regulations. So those consequences will just sit there as a little hidden landmine for you to unfortunately step on later down the road. So always comparing the risk and the consequences should be able to lead you to, do I need to invest in professional help? What do my peers have to say?
Yeah, wow. Because then we can go further into it by saying, well, there's so many places where AI has have hallucinated and smoked shrooms on the weekends and made up all these stories. And then it comes back to, but who's the human? But in a legal sense, how do we double check that?
So from the legal perspective, hallucinations are something that we're very aware of. So there's been cases, for example, there was a woman a lawyer in Vancouver who used ChatGPT for some research. She relied on some cases that it brought up that were fake. And I think we've all heard of this by now, lawyers relying on cases that are fake, which is quite shocking. And the judge there said that citing fake cases in court filings and other materials handed to the court is an abusive process and is tantamount to making a false statement to the court. So that's really serious. That's tantamount to lying to the court. So you're subject to contempt charges, you're subject to cost charges, you're subject to proceedings by your regulatory body, and all lawyers are governed by their law societies. So the potential for hallucinations is very high from using what I would call an open or public AI system. Now, here's where I think it gets really, really interesting for law. So law firms and lawyers and designers of case law databases, they know all this. Like, they're very clear about this. Well, we certainly can't make up cases. So some of the tools we have here are really exceptional for the way AI is incorporated. First of all, at the firm I'm at, any AI technology is rigorously tested. There's test groups that work with it for a while. There's the whole IT team. All these people are involved to make sure, like, does this work? Because we have confidentiality issues that has to be rock solid. There can be no hallucinations, nothing like that. It can't be misleading. If it can't provide you with an answer, it just has to tell you, yeah, I don't know. There's not enough information here. So our systems are what I would call closed systems. So if I'm looking for case law, it will be from Canada, and it can't make up cases because it's only looking within that closed environment of all the reported cases. The really terrific thing about our AI systems is I can use it just like ChatGPT. I can ask a general question. I can deep dive. Often in the jurisdictions I work in Northwest Territories and Nunavut, where I'm licensed, there's not as much case law as there is in Ontario or BC or anywhere else. So I can search for cases in those jurisdictions, and then I can ask, are there similar cases in Alberta and BC? And I will get these responses back. Well, yeah, there are, but this one's distinguished a little bit. It's not really the same, but it might be helpful. And then for its sources, it gives me the paragraphs from the case that it's relying on, so I can double check the sources right there, and it's fairly bang on. It will also point me to other sources, again within the closed system, which are textbooks and commentary from leading law scholars. So for us to rely on our internal legal AI, we don't have to worry too much about hallucinations, but we do have to worry about it not quite getting things right. So of course, we're always checking the sources.
I love what you said. It is the checking of the sources. So what I'm hearing is yes, let's use the closed system for when it is actually legal advice. But I also believe that that's where the lawyer comes in, and that's where the professional side comes in. For me, if I'm an administrator, and let's say again, it's election time in BC now, it's election time, I think, in Ontario as well, and another province. We need to do our update our election bylaws. Okay, so it's all about the prompting now to try and see what are the prompts that we can use in order to find the information. So that's key, how to prompt it. Then second of all, to ask the sources, like exactly what you were saying, because a lot of the sources that it can get from that is open is still within Canada. So if you're able to click on the links and to go open up the bylaw that it came from, or compare the actual bylaw that it came from and read it for yourself, then you have a better idea. But if you can't find it and it's some other thing that, oh no, it's on this site somewhere, then you know there's a red flag. So it is, yeah.
I completely agree. And I think one thing that people don't realize, and this is something that I learned from you, is using prompts is not a matter of just asking the question and then getting the answer and then going and looking at sources. Using the prompts is really, it's an art form, and you have to learn how to do that. And I did learn that from you, and I incorporate that into my practice.
Awesome.
Is I will shape the prompts because I know that if I ask the question differently, I can get a more precise answer. And sometimes by asking a different question, if I get a wildly different answer, I'm like, well, something's not right here. So first of all, people have to make sure that they're using their prompts properly and not just relying on whatever, how do I make a bylaw for my local election in this jurisdiction?
Exactly.
And they'll get an answer and it's like, okay, well, here's how I do it. That you can't rely on that. And then the second part is the checking of the sources. So I've done a test on a couple of different public AI systems and asked it legal questions that I already knew the answer to. And sometimes I would actually get a pretty decent answer to that question. But if I asked the question slightly differently, I could get a lower quality answer, and it would point to different sources. And one of the things that really shocked me is that when I would click on those sources, sometimes it would be what it was saying was making sense, but it would be relying on some legislation from the United States or somewhere, or some other website that doesn't actually have very accurate information. So all I'm getting from AI is an answer that's relying on information that's available on the web. And I don't know if you know this, Daphne, but not everything that you read on the internet is true.
Really?
Well, you end up with this information, and if you just take a look at the summary, it might be like, oh yeah, to do elections, you have to do this, but you have to go into the link, like you said, go in, see what it says, because again, you've got the high risk it's wrong, and you've got these high consequences. So if you're not doing both those things, learning how to prompt properly and following up on those sources properly, you shouldn't be using AI at all for things that have high consequences.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir. Amazing. But I would then add another layer to it of saying, now that you've done your research and you have done all the prompting and checked your sources, and ask it to criticize what you've done and maybe get some different ideas out, then to still send it to a legal professional just to cover your own bum. That might...
I mean, obviously, being a lawyer, I would support that. I think people get tired of hearing lawyers always say, well, you should come to me for proper legal advice. But this is what we do. We do those deep dives. We understand those things. We will even look at prior versions of legislation. Sometimes when we're interpreting legislation, we have to go all the way back to the Hansard, which is how politicians were debating the legislation. What was their intent for this legislation? It gets very complicated that way. So I would really encourage administrators to set up a relationship with a lawyer always, so that because some people might not know that you can't just phone up a lawyer and I start my billing timer and I go ahead and give you legal advice. We have to do what's called clearing conflicts to make sure that I'm not representing somebody that maybe you're already in a civil dispute with. We also send you an agreement. We often get a retainer. There's these procedures. So it's good to find a lawyer that you will want to work with, somebody who will listen to you, somebody who will explain things to you, somebody who will make your life easier and not harder. And make sure you get all of that stuff out of the way, like the retainer letter and the conflict clearance. And then you can let me know, we're working on this new AI policy, or we're working on this new elections bylaw. And we want to have you take a look at it when we have our draft done. No problem. Happy to help. I think that's a good way to go about it. And then if you use sort of the risk consequences model, maybe you're drafting a policy that you just don't think it has a lot of consequences for you. And you might decide, let's just roll this policy out. Low consequence, it's not really that important. We're not legally bound by anything. We're going to make our own policy and we're going to roll it out. We don't need to hire a lawyer for this. But always keeping in mind, if you're going to suffer consequences from your errors, then get a lawyer involved early and let us make sure that this bylaw or whatever it is you're trying to do is going to work for you in the future.
Is there a cost benefit for an administrator to actually go and do the deep dive on themselves, to try and do the research when they draft the bylaw or the policy, for example, and give a report with that to you saying, hey, I looked at this municipality's bylaw and I took this piece from that municipality's bylaw and I compared the two and I made it my own. So that's kind of like a report I would give it to counsel to say where we did our research from. Would that be a cost benefit to share all of that with the legal professional too, to try and bring down all the legal costs, or not really?
I think that would be an important part of the relationship, because I've received research from clients that they've done that it seems like sometimes it's trying to be disguised as original research rather than some AI answers. But we have to go through all of that stuff. And so if I have a good relationship with you and we've talked about this and we've talked about how you use AI, and I know that, maybe it's administrator, that they've worked with you, they're aware of how to use AI, they know what the risks are, the consequences, they know how to check sources, that's great. And then you could send me something with the sources you relied on. I would encourage you not to get too detailed on it, but for a broad-based overview, that would be terrific. And that's where we would start out a discussion. I would have a look at it and say, these are good sources. This is the right act. I would have a look at that act and just make sure you're not missing anything. Like, we'd be on the same page there. And I think that that's good value because you already have a good idea of how to use AI. And I'm assuming you're using a public AI like ChatGPT or something.
It'll probably be something more like Pilot, because that's more secure within Canada. Right. But yeah.
Yeah. So if my first question to a client who would ask me about using AI would be like, well, how well do you know how to use AI? Like, how do you use it? Maybe we'll have a discussion about that first. I would encourage them, I think, to have a dialogue with me and maybe use me a little bit more as your AI. But I think really what's going to be happening in the future is more and more clients will be creating their own drafts of a bylaw or whatever it is, and then sending it to me for more of a final review. One of the issues with that, though, is doing those reviews from my side can be quite intensive. If you have a complex piece of legislation, it might interact with other pieces of legislation. There may be some case law related to that where a court has said, well, you know, that clause 12 doesn't really work like that. So it does take some time to do it really well. I think I would be reluctant to say to a client, well, I'll just take a quick look at it. Because then what am I going to say? Yeah, you're good to go. I mean, I can't do that. It's not, my obligation is to do the very best I can for my client. But that being said, if people who know how to use AI are using something like Copilot to draft their own documents, if we're talking about it a little bit, so I can keep up to date, send me your draft, I'll see which direction you're going. I will tell them I'm going to review the legislation myself, because otherwise literally I can't take the job. I can't say, well, I'll just give it a quick read and say, yeah, I'll give it a rubber stamp. We don't really do that. So if you want it to be legally, well, as airtight as anything can be, you would definitely want to speak to a lawyer. Maybe you can put it into a place where it's much more advanced. You speak with your lawyer, you tell them how you did it, you both have an understanding about how you use AI. That would be much better, because what will happen is people will send me these documents. They will have some kind of case that they cite. Look, this is the case. We need to rely on this. There's all this information online about it. This is a winner. And then like within 5 minutes of reading this document, I'm just like, well, this is wrong. Like none of this works. And another thing that happens is you will give a client advice on a direction to go, and then they might Google that or put it into ChatGPT. Now, fortunately, I've had that happen actually live in front of me with a group, a board. And I told them, you know, this is something that you have to make sure you do. You can't have this in your bylaw. And this woman's like, yeah, checks out. It's like, well, that's good. But we often get stuff that's, it's wrong. We're advising them this way. They'll come back with their counterpoints. And we have to read through all that stuff. And if I had a better idea of how they were using AI, I would be less skeptical. Maybe I would say this person really knows how to use AI. So I'm gonna pay close attention to what they have to say. But often it's just poorly written, plucked straight out of the AI generated response, and not of much value to anybody.
So what I'm hearing you saying is, don't just disregard AI. AI is not just from the devil. There are useful points to it, but it is how you use it, your relationship with your legal counsel, the prompting that you're using, your sources that you're using, and then as your relationship grow, you also learn more from your attorney or your legal counsel, as well as from the pieces of legislation that you do, because both are sources of learning and sources of information for you as an administrator to do better and to serve your community better. Both pieces are, in my opinion, equally important. Other people can have other opinions. But I think if you have a combination of both of that, you as an administrator will be a lot more effective, a lot more efficient, a lot more proficient in everything that you do, if you also apply basic common logical sense and critical thinking.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we really have to be careful of, though, is a kind of bias that creeps in when you're looking for answers. So you're a busy administrator, and this happens to lawyers not any lawyers at our firm, but it does happen to lawyers. I can understand it. They're really, really busy. Administrators, as we said earlier, all these things going on. Oh, I need to get that bylaw drafted. Draft me a bylaw for this.
Yes.
And it gives you the answer that you want. Here's a bylaw that suits your needs. It does this, this, and this. Well, thank goodness that's going to be off my plate. And you have to be really, really careful of this inherent bias to get things done and get something resolved, and use AI for that. In your presentation that I saw, you talked about a lot of different ways that people can use AI in really smart ways to take over tasks that I hadn't even thought about, that oh, that's off our plate now. But if your goal is to just get something done, that might not be the best way to go about it, because you'll end up making mistakes. If you're in that much of a hurry to move a bylaw out because you didn't realize the deadline is in 3 days and you have a council meeting, you just simply can't rely on AI to craft that for you, because your counsel might also say, well, this looks good to us. Like, if you're the one drafting it, let's go ahead and we'll read it and we'll approve it. And then again, a few years later, it comes out that this doesn't work at all. So you have to be very careful about getting the answers that suit you and leaving it at that.
And training the AI also for what you want it to look for. And that's again within the prompting that you said. But you and me can geek out on this all the time, because I know I love this, and I know you are an absolutely phenomenal attorney at this. So how can people get a hold of you?
They can connect with me if they have issues in, I'm licensed in the Northwest Territories in Nunavut. Of course, our firm is in the West. We have lawyers that are licensed all across Canada. But if somebody needed to get a hold of me, they could get a hold of me at sparker@lawsonlundell.com. And if you just Google Scott Parker, Lawson Lundell, I'm easy to find.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for having this chat with me and sharing all your knowledge and seeing how we can work together with AI to make better municipal governance and to truly just be better public servants. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. This is great, and I truly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Daphne.
So that's it. Please stay tuned for next time. Let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about, and please do reach out to Scott for your legal questions. He'd be happy to form a relationship with you in the areas that they license. Have an amazing day.
Thanks.
Awesomeness. Now we can just stop it.